Good morning, campers. Welcome to Radio Camp Applet, a Percy Jackson retelling podcast. I am your host, Zach.
And I'm B.
And this week we read Chapter 4 of Percy Jackson and the Titan's Curse, Thalia Torches New England. And you guys gotta buckle up, get your student permits, and we're gonna be going on a wild, wacky ride.
Yeah, this chapter is, what is it? It's short, and it's exactly what I thought it would be. That's it's not super complicated.
It feels exactly like a student permit test.
That's true. Yeah, it does feel a little bit. I never had the problem of going too fast when I was learning to drive. I think I had the problem of going too slow because I was terrified of crashing into the other cars. I think that's just speaks to the kind of personality I have.
I feel like if you're ever in a police pursuit, you just be like, I gotta slow down. What if the police get tired?
I would never be in a police pursuit to begin with because I'd be like, I did something wrong, I'm freaking out, and then I would pull over, and then it would not even be my car they're chasing is probably what would happen. Have you ever gotten a speeding ticket?
Not that I know of.
You just sped right past them. I could outrun them.
Well, no, it's gonna be when I do the Bird Box challenge, and they tell me I'm driving recklessly.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty reckless to have a blindfold on. I got one speeding ticket a couple months into having my permit or into having my license.
So B, what did you think of this chapter?
I mean, it's kind of just what it says on the tin, really. It's a very descriptive chapter name. We're always talking about chapter names, and it's no specific wordplay here. It just sort of is saying what happens. You already know that Apollo is the sun god. You know that those powers could set things on fire. You know that Thalia's a little bit reckless and maybe not fully trained in certain things. And so it just kind of converges into this chapter, which is her setting stuff on fire accidentally. Or making people accidentally too freezing because she's driving too far away.
I just imagine now with Apollo, he has a cell phone and he's texting while driving. Whoop, that place got a little too cold. I really enjoy the character of Apollo just because out of all the gods so far, he's been the one that's just he's having fun with it rather than taking everything super serious. Rather than the cool thing about it is that you get the comparison between Artemis and Apollo, who are both twins. One super serious while the other one just having a good time.
Yeah, it's always funny to see twins portrayed in media because it's always, they're either creepily similar or they're opposites. That tends to be the kind of choice that they make. Okay, either they're in personality completely different or they're just essentially interchangeable.
Come play with us, B. Come play with us.
Yeah, exactly. I like that they're so different. There is the thing where he calls her his little sister and then she's we're twins, but he's I was born first, which is definitely a real thing that twins do. My sister does that all the time to me where she calls me her little sibling despite the fact that we're only an hour and 45 minutes apart.
The one cool thing that I noticed while I was reading this as well as with their fun little banter is their personalities are pretty much the personification of what they symbolize. Artemis is supposed to symbolize the moon, and Apollo is supposed to symbolize fire. So obviously Apollo is going to have a very fiery personality, whereas Artemis is going to have more of a waxing and wane type of personality, where she's either really reserved. She takes herself
more seriously and all of that. It also makes sense that because he brings the sun, or there's an interesting description of that he doesn't carry the sun necessarily. It's sort of the emotional concept of the sun to people, which is a very nebulous description of what he does, but he's not bringing the physical celestial body so much as the idea of warmth and people's sort of cultural understanding of what the sun means. And that makes sense that he's sort of this beach bummy guy who's really chill. He has a cutoff t-shirt and is speaking in a very Owen Wilson sort of way where he just doesn't, or a Matthew McConaughey sort of way, just a very chillaxed kind of California dude.
Actually, I really want to have Matthew McConaughey as Apollo. All right, Artemis.
He might be too old though, right? Because isn't he supposed to look like a 16-year-old?
Matthew McConaughey is a godsend, and he can look like a 16-year-old if he wants to. I can actually believe it.
All that CGI, yeah.
No CGI. It's just, if he says he's 16 years old, I would believe it.
Wow, that 16-year-old is wrinkly and jacked. It's weird.
But also when it comes to their personalities as well, is again the idea of Apollo, he's supposed to be kind of this hippy dippy person because he does poetry, he's the god of prophecies, he does all these things. My other favorite thing about this chapter is the idea that, the sun doesn't exist. It's a gigantic global conspiracy. And that the reason why they think it's a gigantic flaming gas ball is because Artemis started setting rumors about Apollo.
Because he's just like bloviating and full of himself. So like it's like a pun on how full of himself he is. He's a gas bag, basically.
Which is great because that's like the fun little banter that you should have. Like when it comes to like writing siblings, I have a problem with it a little times because it's like one of those things. It's either they hate each other, like they want nothing to do with each other, or they are creepily love each other. Like we're getting into like some like Cersei and Jaime Lannister.
Yeah, oof, that's not great. But yeah, in this they have like a pretty believable like dynamic because they don't hate each other necessarily, but they're not best friends. They sort of have this like weird, grudging friendship, allyship where they help each other, but they're kind of annoyed at each other and they tease in like a loving way, especially like the way that Apollo calls Artemis his little sister, and then like Artemis is just like, oh, you're a moron and you don't take things seriously and whatever. So that it's believable, I guess. And it's kind of weirdly refreshing to see gods who, I guess, aren't so powerfully bent on some sort of like grudge, like they're annoyed at each other, but they don't have like some sort of like death wish against each other.
It also could possibly be because they're younger gods. They're not as old as Poseidon, Zeus, and Hades. It's like they're just like the teenagers equivalent of like the gods, or they're just like everything's fun and relaxed rather than being like why so serious like old people.
Well, Artemis, I mean, she chooses to look like what, like a 12-year-old or something, right? And then Apollo looks like a 16-year-old. This is kind of a weird aspect of this chapter is like Thalia starts to sort of weirdly lust after him, and then he's sort of being flirty with all of like the hunters, even though they're like kids or like sort of look like kids, and he looks 16, which is creepy even if he was literally 16, but he's like an old god instead. There's just like some creepy moments where I'm like, I don't know about all of that.
So, like, the problem when it comes to that is, like, well, technically some of them are probably, like, much older than you think they are, but it's also they still have, like, the body of, like, a young girl and just, like, oh, God, it's, like, grody.
Yeah, he looked about 17 or 18.
Yeah, and then you have, like, specifically the one that he's hitting on is Zoe Nightshade, and he calls her sweetheart, and I love it's just this whole thing about, like, Artemis is just, like, she doesn't want none of that.
But then also he, like, gets very interested in Thalia, and that's why he picks her to drive the weird caravan or whatever. It's his like chariot that gets turned into it starts off as a Maserati because he's like, oh, a sports car, but then obviously I can't fit all of these people, so he changes it into like a school trip bus basically.
Yeah, we're going on a school trip. Yeah, and I thought that was really clever to have something that's like, oh yeah, it makes sense. Like when Rick Riordan was writing this, oh yeah, they can't all fit into the convertible and go shopping, losers. They have to actually get into the school bus.
Yeah, I kind of want to read this like passage because it's just spooky and well, not spooky, but just kind of icky. And now, sis, transportation for the hunters, you say. Good timing. I was just about ready to roll. These demigods will also need a ride, Artemis said, pointing to us. Some of Chiron's campers. No problem. Apollo checked us out. Let's see. Thalia, right? I've heard about you. Thalia blushed. Hi, Lord Apollo. Zeus's girl, yes. Makes you my half-sister. Used to be a tree, didn't you? Glad you're back. I hate it when pretty girls turn into trees. Man, I remember one time. Brother, Artemis said, you should get going. Like, he's immediately like, you're pretty and also you're my half-sister. Like, woo, that's a weird sentence to have. Like, not great, Bob.
Well, it's not like... Let's do the thing that's like the idea, like, let's break down that sentence. Like, if he didn't say half-sister, it would be less creepy, but because he says half-sister, it becomes more creepy.
She's his half-sister, and then immediately is, like, weirdly flirtatious. It's just, like, he can't... He's one of those people, I'm sure you've interacted with one in your day, where it's, like, you ever meet someone,
day, yes.
One in your day, where, like, the type of dude, or, like they're any kind of gender person would do this, where they're, like, they don't know how to act around people other than flirtatious. Like, that's their version of friendly, is sort of weirdly flirtatious, and you're like, why are you like this? Because I never understood people like that, but they definitely exist.
Oh, you mean nice guys finish last type of dudes? Or you're talking about...
No, well, that's
like...
different, because that's sort of like the opposite in a way, because it's like very like introverted, like entitled people. But I'm talking about like If you've ever met like a very like gregarious, like outgoing person who like they seem like they're flirting with everyone just because they're always like complimenting people and like winking and like just acting like they're buddy with everyone, and like that's kind of what I think Apollo is in this chapter. Like he's not necessarily like actually trying to like court these people. That's just his personality, but it does come across as a little skeevy.
Well, also it's like the idea again of it that is his personality, because he's like the personification of the sun. Of course, he's going to be like overly passionate and very fiery, though maybe his idea of subtlety doesn't quite work because like, again, half-sister, but maybe we're looking into this again as like something more than we think it is, but it's also, it's hard to like really explain, especially with like demigods.
Right, you try to like map it onto real world behavior, and in some ways that's what Rick Riordan's trying to do. He's trying to make them human-like and relatable, but then you're like, okay, but they go by different rules than humans, so you don't exactly know it's appropriate. This is another creepy thing. He says, Zoe ordered the hunters to start loading. She picked up her camping pack and Apollo said, "Here, sweetheart, let me get that." Zoe recoiled. Her eyes flashed murderously. "Brother," Artemis chided, "you do not help my hunters. You do not look at, talk to, or flirt with my hunters. You do not call them sweetheart." Apollo spread his hands. "Sorry, I forgot. Hey, sis, where are you off to anyway?" Like, he's like, "Oh, I forgot I can't flirt with, like, your weird young hunters who are in your cult of personality." There's just a lot going on. There's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, no, especially when it comes to like in this chapter, like we can see like the very different personality of Apollo, how he's very like laid back, and sometimes he forgets things. Like he gives the sun to Thalia to drive, and she accidentally torches New England.
Yeah, the concept of the sun, which is almost, it's weird but it's also has the power to burn things. He describes it in this very, like, wibbly wobbly timey wimey way where he tries to, like, explain to Nico, like, what exactly he is, or, like, the difference between him and, like, the science of the sun, and it doesn't totally make sense.
So it harkens back to the idea again of, like, what is Western civilization, how the gods can, stay alive, is because if people believe in something hard enough, it will happen. And this is, like, where you think of, like, the flat earthers are just like, you see that up there? That's the sun. Doesn't quite exist. We actually have like thermal video of like it's actually a car, a convertible, and it just sounds like a crazy concept. Like if you really think about it and someone actually figures out that the sun doesn't exist, like you'd sound crazy. It's kind of like the Matrix and how the philosophy of like artificial simulation, and like if you believe in something hard enough, obviously it has to be true.
Yeah, I'm just going to read this passage because I'm going to try to like break it down, because even I think it's supposed to not totally make sense, but
well, I think it's supposed to be something that's more philosophical than it's supposed to make sense. It's not supposed to be like logical.
But how does it work? Nico asked. "I thought the sun was a big fiery ball of gas." Apollo chuckled and ruffled Nico's hair. "That rumor probably got started because Artemis used to call me a big fiery ball of gas. Seriously, kid, it depends on whether you're talking astronomy or philosophy. You want to talk astronomy? Bah, what fun is that? You want to talk about what humans think about the sun? Ah, now that's more interesting. They've got a lot riding on the sun, or so to speak. It keeps them warm, grows their crops, powers engines, makes everything look, well, sunnier. This chariot is built out of human dreams about the sun, kid. It's as old as Western civilization. Every day it drives across the sky from east to west, lighting up all those puny little mortal lives. The chariot is a manifestation of the sun's power, the way mortals perceive it. Make sense?" Nico shook his head. No.
So when I'm looking at this, as we read this passage, it's the idea again of like what Western civilization is to the gods. Like they needed to survive, because if, let's just say, everyone forgot about the Greek mythology for some weird reason, the gods wouldn't exist, because it's not like a actual concept in the brain. So thus they can't have consciousness. It's a very like I said before, it's very much like the Matrix, or actually better yet, it's a lot like The Secret. It's a lot like The Secret in how if you believe in like positivity, obviously positive things are going to happen to you if you subscribe to that way of thinking.
Did I ever tell you about, this is a spoiler for a very old, out-of-print book that no one probably cares about, but Roald Dahl, one of his only full-length books was this book called Sometime Never, A Fable for Supermen, and it's this weird, complicated story about gremlins trying to, sabotage, like, the Royal Air Force and, like, other soldiers to, like, destroy humanity so they can get back their land. And then instead they just kind of wait out until humans kill themselves. And it takes, like, forever, and it's mostly just waiting for humans to just, like, bomb the crap out of the earth, and then there's nothing left but, like, literally worms and dirt. And then the gremlins come out from hiding from underground, and what happens is they actually disappear because without humans they can't exist because they exist within the imagination of man. So it's like this weird self-defeating thing because they can't exist without the context of being believed in, sort of like Tinkerbell or something. And I think the gods are similar.
Like, that's like a really good idea to actually summarize it like Tinkerbell, such as like Tinkerbell, you need to believe in fairies for it to live, and Tinkerbell, that's who she is, and you need to do that, or you need to clap, or she dies. Yes, kids, clap or Tinkerbell will die.
So do you think that the gods would disappear if there was no one who believed in them, but because there's demigods, then they survive? Is that like how it works? I don't know if they've really gone into that philosophy.
So demigods are more like the byproduct of gods, whereas it's almost like the idea of like, let's look at the world as like a gigantic steamship. Like the idea that all the thoughts and feelings of people that believe in the gods or believe in all these things are the coal that like power the engines, and the demigods are like the pistons that do the gods' bidding, and, you know, the ship goes. It's kind of like that. That's the idea that I'm thinking of, especially with the sun, is everyone believes in it, so it must be true. And that's like a much easier way to explain it. Like, here's an example, everyone. Take an object and just drop it. That's gravity.
Well, don't drop it. Don't just drop any object. If you have your phone in your hand.
Well, I'm just saying, it's like the idea of let's take a book or something and you drop it. What's going to happen?
It'll fall.
It will fall. Now, what if I was to tell you that it's only us thinking about it that's going to fall? Like, what if it just stopped in midair? Would you be able to believe it, B?
No. Well, because, like, does science exist in this universe? Like, I'm trying to think of, like, how it... There's science, and then it's also justified by the gods. They're, like, tandem working together somehow in this complicated way.
So when it comes to science, like, you have to remember two things that are fundamental about mythology. And that is, mythology is to explain the unknown, and that mythology is supposed to explain the unexplainable. Which, I guess the unknown is like anything can happen, and the unexplainable is just like, where does lightning come from? How do we explain this without being able to explain it in a scientific way? Whereas when you actually have like these ideas,
that's where creation myths come from to begin with, is just like, let's create a story that justifies the world we live in, before science was really a thing of like taking the observable universe and actually trying to figure out what's literally happening. It's more just like, oh, well, I understand how people work, so I'm going to create this story of like gods and demigods, and people have children and they do these different things and they affect the way that the world works. And that's kind of just the gist of Percy Jackson in general, is like the idea that everything that happens in the world is actually just like this melodrama of all these gods and demigods and titans interacting with each other in different ways.
Yes. And I think when it comes to like the idea of like, if everyone stopped believing, obviously they would cease to exist, because there's no one, not that they're not believing into them, but they're not feeding into the idea of, oh my God, this is like very like philosophical. It's like the idea of like it being conscious, of like these gods would just disappear. Same as with like monsters. Like the reason why a lot of the monsters in the deep of Tartarus are slowly coming back is because people are talking about them again. Remember, words have powers and names have powers.
So it all connects back to that. Man, I didn't think that we'd get too deep into like the nitty gritty of how this universe works in this chapter, and yet here we are.
Hello there, Rick Ryden. Thank you for opening up the Radio Camp Half-Blood Philosophy Department.
Yeah. I'm having bad flashbacks to Philosophy Club.
Now I'm just imagining a bunch of our listeners are just in their beds right now, underneath the sheets, and pretending they didn't listen to this episode. It's
they're like, wait, what?
Oh.
Huh?
They're having like an existential crisis.
Like, if you don't believe in something, then it's not real. Yeah, I keep thinking about like just taking philosophy class in college, or like the philosophy club that I went to in high school, and just there was a lot of discussions like this that went nowhere, where we just talked about like, oh, well, if you have good intentions when you do something, then is it always good even if the outcome is bad? Like those kinds of questions that keep you up at night.
Well, especially when it comes to philosophy, it's rather than talking about like what's and like the hard facts, but it's like the ifs and the whats. Like, what would happen if I did this? How would you feel if I did this to you? Like, these are like the It's the human condition.
It's so funny that we're talking about this in such a goofy chapter where Thalia sets everything on fire. I mean, that's just the gist of really the plot. Like, there's a lot of, like, other implication stuff about, like, the dynamic of the gods. And we do talk a little bit about, like, Apollo explaining, like, how he got dubbed the sun god after Helios was at first the sun god. And, like, there's some, like, backstory there, but mainly as far as plot, we get this car, or I guess in this case a bus, and then Thalia very stressfully with her, like, weird half-brother crush or whatever's going on there, like, has a mad dash drive through New England accidentally setting stuff on fire with her Sunmobile.
So, like, when it comes to, like, Apollo again, it's like you have to also keep in mind he doesn't have quite the sense of, like, how things work, such as, like, let's look at the haiku. This is a good time to bring up the haiku because I love the idea of the haiku. I'm going to read it right now, okay? I can't really explain, B, what a haiku is. Could you explain a haiku to our listeners that might not know what a haiku is? Because poetry isn't my thing.
It's like a short form Japanese poem that consists of 5 syllables, then 7 syllables, then 5 syllables. They're usually about nature, like an observation about nature or time. Usually nature, I guess, like an observable universe type of thing. But in this case, he's just like saying nonsense about himself and boasting.
Are you ready for this haiku, this mad dash haiku for like slam poetry sessions? Green grass breaks through snow. Artemis pleads for my help. I am so cool.
Yep, and then that's not the right amount of syllables.
And then it's like, why don't you change it to I am big-headed? Like, oh, no, that's not enough syllables.
No, that's too many syllables, because that's 8 syllables.
And then he finally gets it to green grass breaks through snow. Artemis pleads for my help. I am so awesome. I'm trying to find the limerick real quick.
Oh, God, the limerick, too. Yeah, because he just like, he's just inspired because he went to Japan, so that's why he is saying a haiku, but then he also went to Limerick, the place of Limerick, and learned that form of poetry. Where it's like, it's like, once was a man from Peru who dreamed he was eating his shoe, woke with a fright in the middle of the night to find that his dream had come true. Like, that's a limerick.
Oh, I love limericks. There once was a goddess from Sparta. I've got it, Apollo announced. I am so awesome. Like, the only reason why people remember limericks is because of the SpongeBob episode where SpongeBob goes into his own dream.
And then Gary's just like, there once was a man from...
But as the chapter goes along, we find out that Artemis has to hunt alone. So she turns into, like, the most metal emo thing I've ever heard. Snow and shadow. And she disappears into the forest, which just sounds so brilliant.
And she refuses to explain herself to her brother. Because he's just like, why? Why are you hunting? What are you hunting? And she's like, I don't gotta explain anything to you because you're Matthew McConaughey and you annoy me.
All right. And she disappears. But they're gonna meet again during the winter solstice. So they all like load up into the bus, which was once a Maserati, which is so funny because I'm thinking about, because we're about to like review Ready Player One, and I'm thinking about like it should be like a Trans Am or something like so flashy.
I mean, a Maserati's flashy too. It's like a sports car.
But like a real like muscle car. Like this whole book is supposed to be like the personification of like America. Why isn't it like an American-made car?
I guess that's true. Maseratis are Italian, right?
Yeah. So they all load up into the bus and Apollo's so happy. He's like talking to like Thalia and they're having a good time. Though the most important thing that I want to bring up before we finish this, before we get into the wacky ride, is that the way they describe Apollo is he's a lot like Luke, except less evil.
Yes, they do describe that. So yeah, like the beachy vibes, I guess, like the blonde hair, and he's supposed to look 17 or 18, which again, in this chapter we find out Thalia, because there's like complicated age things with Thalia because she should be 19, but technically she's turning 16 because of like the weird delay in aging, but more slowly as a tree, which is like a whole other complicated thing.
And conveniently her birthday is next week.
Yep. This is how we find out it's December 22nd, I want to say. Is that the solstice?
Oh, that's kind of weird, isn't it, B? That's also the winter solstice.
That can't be a coincidence.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not a betting man, but like, I mean, doesn't that seem like a little fishy? Like, Percy Jackson would pull out a gigantic fish.
A little fishy with Percy Jackson. There definitely has to be some sort of thing because they don't make a big deal about it, so there must be something about her birthday having to do with the solstice. I don't know what, though.
Hey, B, remember that prophecy from last book?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Well, what does that prophecy say, specifically?
They're on their birthday, on their 16th birthday, they make a decision. Is she the one who makes the decision? Or is it Percy?
I don't know.
No, but wait. Oh, I think it's Percy who makes the decision. I don't know. I couldn't say, Zach.
I don't know. I've only read these books.
I couldn't say.
There's just things to keep in mind, to keep the thing in mind. It's not like all the puzzle pieces are coming together.
They're coming together. Though
the most adorable thing happens, I love it, is that Apollo's like, hey, do you want to drive my car? And Thalia is just like terrified. Not really. I mean, I'm about to drive the actual sun. And like he pushes a button and it becomes like a student driver.
Right. She's never driven before ever. And he's like, do you want the concept of the sun? You might set everything on fire or send Cape Cod into an ice age. But please, by all means, step behind the wheel, beloved half-sister, who I'm going to be creepy and flirtatious towards.
I don't think he was trying to be creepy or flirtatious, because after that, he kind of stops.
Oh, he's like very concerned because he's like, you're doing great. Because it's funny because he's supposed to be very laid back. So he sort of pretends to be very chipper and upbeat, but then she sort of just keeps veering in the wrong directions. He's like, you got to pull up a little bit. You're setting things on fire.
Like, my favorite part about this as well is that, Apollo pushes a button and like a little thing comes in and says student driver. And I just imagine like, right next to Thalia is like another like steering wheel and like a gas and the brake.
Yeah.
It just becomes like a little student
That would have
car.
been way more helpful if there was another steering wheel, but instead he's just sort of standing there helpless, which I don't know, like, it just sort of manufactured drama in some ways because he doesn't have to do that. He could just do it.
Yeah, but it makes this more fun because he's like explaining all these things like an actual driving instructor. Like he has no idea what's going to happen. And like they start flying, which, okay, I like to think of everything when I'm reading in like a visual sense. This looks like something that would be like in the aesthetic of like Wes Anderson, where it's just like you take a little like Matchbox like school bus, like fly up into the air, but like really shakily.
Just fly into the air, yeah. Yeah, it's very like Grand Budapest Hotel, where it's just like this little like whimsical model just like bounding up and down the sky. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like strong like Harry Potter flying car vibes happening here for sure when Ron steals the car and there's a lot of chaos to be had. I think flying cars in general.
The difference though is that Ron can actually drive the car. Hey-oh.
That's true. Ron can actually drive. Well, I mean, it's precarious, but less so than in this case because she's never driven before.
No, he drove that car pretty well until like the car lands into the Whomping Willow and the car engine dies.
Yes, yeah, there's other stuff that happens. That's true. In some ways, it's funny because it's more chaotic throughout the driving as it is with the, I forget the type of car in Harry Potter, but it doesn't matter that much. But
it's a Ford Angula.
Right, exactly. We've talked about this. So the Ford in Harry Potter, Ron's a better driver in general because he's actually driven, but it ends worse because they end up in a tree. Well, in this case, weirdly enough, it's very white knuckle the whole time, but they end up being fine at Camp Half-Blood eventually. There is some burning of things along the way, but they end up getting there in one piece.
So while I was reading this, I was thinking about like if they made another awful adaptation, what would happen? What would happen is that Thalia would like fly too low, and all of a sudden the U.S. military would pick it up on their radars, and they'd have like a action scene with like F-14s like trying to like shoot down the school bus. Oh man, it'd be so great.
They're celebrating, it's fireworks. And then it's like really them trying to like shoot like heat-guided missiles at her because she's setting everything ablaze.
I'm just imagining like the two pilots. Do you have a visual on it, sir? Well, it looks like a school bus.
Is it that Miss Frizzle again?
Now I'm like imagining like the Harrier jet like pulls up to like the driver's side and then Thalia like pulls down the window and like waves at him. And the guy's like, what?
I feel like I genuinely reference Halloween Town every episode, but it is also reminiscent of the Halloween Town bus a little bit. Because it's a bus that is flying.
Well, that bus is like scary because it's like an interdimensional device.
It's an interdimensional bus, yeah. That's sort of more of a TARDIS situation. There's a lot of reminiscent weird travel things that this is calling to mind. I think the fact that it's a bus definitely makes me think of that, the magic school bus too.
For me, I always love the idea of like pure Americana coming into like literature like this. Like if you have something so creative and so out of like worldly, like, oh, it's just a regular school bus that's flying, like that is so cool. It reminds me of the bus from the movie Sky High.
Sky High. There's so many flying buses in TV and literature for some reason.
Well, it makes sense because it's something that's so like, when you think of like education, the things you think about is apples and school buses.
Yeah, also because, like, if it's a kids' media thing, like, that's the transportation that they're most often in if it's not, like, their parents' car, I guess. But, like, school buses is something that is very, like, familiar, and that's kind of the whole gist of what Rick Riordan's trying to do, where he's taking the familiar and putting an ancient Greek spin on it.
Which is great because, again, like, I love the idea of, like, Americana bleeding into, like, Greco themes is, like, one of the best things you could possibly do because you take something like, let's look at urban fantasy again. It's the idea of like a wizard with a gun. It's so cool.
Wizard with a gun is always really funny. Every time. I know we talk about it a lot, but just, oh my god, the idea of a wizard with a gun is so, so funny.
I'll do you one better. A wizard with a gun driving a motorcycle boat, still having like the pointy hat and like big beard. And he has like a leather jacket, but it's also like his wizard robes. Like there's nothing more cool than that. Actually, take that back.
Yeah.
Maybe like a luchador, like wearing his mask, but also wearing like a suit. Like there's nothing classier than that.
It's good, yeah. Or like the reverse, a cop with a magic wand.
That sounds so good. But like that's what I love about this. And then we have the idea again of like, for some reason Thalia is just like freaking out of her mind. Like she's like really nervous. Like she's like white knuckle.
She's losing her mind. She's so stressed. Which, I mean, that was me when I started out driving, so it makes sense because she's never driven at all. Never mind literally the sun. I love the exchange that Percy has where he's like sort of jealous that she gets to drive while he like actually has experience driving. Thalia gripped the wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. She looked like she was going to be sick. "What's wrong?" I asked her. "Nothing," she said shakily. Nothing's wrong." She pulled back on the wheel, it tilted, and the bus lurched upward so fast I fell back and crashed against something soft. "Ow," Grover said. "Sorry." "Slower," Apollo said. "Sorry," Thalia said. "I've got it under control." I managed to get to my feet, looking out the window. I saw a smoking ring of trees from the clearing where we'd taken off. "Thalia," I said, "lighten up on the accelerator." "I've got it, Percy," she said, gritting her teeth, but she kept it floored. "Loosen up," I told her. "I'm loose," Thalia said. She was so stiff she looked like she was made of plywood. "We need to veer south for Long Island." Apollo said, "Hang a left."
Halfway through, you're just thinking like, Apollo's like, man, this was maybe a bad idea.
Yeah, he thought it was so great. Thalia jerked the wheel and again threw me into Grover, who yelped. "The other left," Apollo suggested. I made the mistake of looking out the window again. We were at airplane height now, so high the sky was starting to look black. "Ah," Apollo said, and I got the feeling he was forcing himself to sound calm. "A little lower, sweetheart. Cape Cod is freezing over." Thalia tilted the wheel. Her face was chalk white, her forehead beaded with sweat. Something was definitely wrong. I'd never seen her like this. The bus pitched down, and somebody screamed. Maybe it was me. Now we were headed straight toward the Atlantic Ocean at 1,000 miles an hour, the New England coastline off to our right, and it was getting hot in the bus.
So when I was reading that, I was thinking about, do you know there's actually a phenomenon for pilots? You're not supposed to look down at the ground while you're flying your plane. You will actually purposely fly the plane into the ground.
Right, this like the psychology of seeing the ground will make you fly it into the ground. Yeah, so not good. You shouldn't do it. Yeah.
So maybe that's like something that like Thalia was like doing. It's just like, you should pull up Thalia. They're at like 180 degrees, like plummeting free fall. Like the atmosphere is like catching on them, so they're like burning into re-entry. And she's like, maybe I should pull up. But I love the idea about how like speed equals heat.
Right, which I guess makes sense because it adds a layer of drama of stakes.
It's perfect for like a visual sense of like, oh, the faster you're going, the more heat you're going to have, much like an engine.
Yeah.
And I just find it so funny that like, they're about to plummet into the Atlantic Ocean and that she's able to like drive the car in time, except she torches New England. Like all the buildings are like smoldering and like on fire.
Yeah, it's funny because it's not like she's trying to be reckless. I think she's just so nervous she doesn't know what she's doing, which is very relatable as a new driver. I don't know like how many like new driver aged people are listening right now, but I definitely remember feeling that way.
So to all the listeners that have driven, please send us a message about your first time driving, your experiences. We'd love to hear it because I don't think I crashed my car, but I remember like I was like so fixated on the mirrors that like I almost drove into a truck head first. And it's funny because I actually have experience doing this. I've been teaching my friend how to drive because he wants to get his license. So like I've actually have like a firsthand account of like, oh my God, I'm Apollo in this situation. Now, I just want to step back for a second and talk about the idea of flying cars and how terrible of an idea that is. Like, they sound really cool until it's like the middle of the night and the person with like the DUI like crashes into your roof.
At the very least, cars are limited to a flat plane. Once you can go vertically, all bets are off. It's very bad.
Like, I'm just imagining, especially, like, imagine sky traffic and, like, one car hits another car. Oh, my God.
Yeah, and then they just, like, drive directly above you and, like, drop down and start smashing your car. Like, there'd be so many... the road rage would be a disaster.
Oh, my God. It would be, like, surviving edge weapons and, like, just, okay. Here's a scenario. Imagine if someone's, like, driving like they're flying and they're speeding. Imagine the space cop. They can't get out of their, like, little, like, space motorcycle. I don't know why I'm saying space motorcycle, but I guess it has the idea of going to space, but like their flying motorcycle is like...
Motorcycle? Nope, that doesn't.
Motorcycle? Yeah, like that. Do you know how fast we're going? I don't know, officer. Maybe like 80 to 90 miles an hour. You're going about 250.
You'd have like no sense of space and time either because you'd be like in the sky. It just wouldn't be great. I wanted to read just what Percy had to say about Thalia being sort of arbitrarily chosen to drive. I'll admit I was jealous. I couldn't wait to start driving. A couple of times that fall, my mom had taken me out to Montauk when the beach road was empty, and she'd let me try out her Mazda. I mean, yeah, that was a Japanese compact, and this was the Sun Chariot, but how different could it be? Pretty different, I imagine.
I figured out the problem and why Thalia is having such a hard time driving.
What's the problem? She's
having to learn with stick rather than automatic transmission.
Yep, that's definitely the problem, not that it's the sky.
That's actually the problem is it's like, have you ever driven stick before?
Oh, no, I have not.
Oh, it is a nightmare. It is such a workout that like, I'm afraid, I refuse to drive a car that isn't automatic now.
Yeah, I've luckily never had to do that.
So I love that about this chapter, again, is the idea of the big challenge of this chapter is not like a big bad monster, but it's the idea of driving, which to a kid is a really scary concept. And Rick Riordan does a very, very good job illustrating that as if he's had experience with this before. And I can only imagine, like...
Do you think that he was ever, like, a student driver instructor? Because, like, he could have been a lot of teachers, teach, like, driver's ed.
Well, my school didn't have driver's ed.
Yeah, my school did, but it was, like, a separate class. I could easily see him being a driver's ed teacher, or like at least knowing of driver's ed teachers, and that's like his experience with that. Or like I guess he has like young kids too.
I would imagine like a lot of it is just experience because it's the idea of there's a lot of things like write what you know. I'm sure this is actually like a real account in like a really like fictitious way of like Rick Riordan's first time driving and how terrified he probably was.
Right, it could have just been his own experience too. I mean, that's just kind of a universal experience when you start driving, is you kind of don't know what you're doing and you feel very like nervous, like, oh my God, I'm only this teenager and I shouldn't have this responsibility to be wielding this powerful machine that could hurt someone. And I guess this is like amped up. The stakes are even higher because she's even more like under the whim of this like powerful thing that is literally the sun instead of just being a car. It's like that same feeling like amped up even more. And that's like what it feels like when you're a kid first learning to drive, I think. Like it's a very abstract concept to be like, oh my God, I'm like behind the wheel of this thing and I could go anywhere and I could make the wrong turn and accidentally hit into someone and kill someone. Like it's a very like existentially like stressful thing when you're that young and you're finally given this very hefty responsibility. So I definitely think that that's why he includes this in the book.
So while you were talking, I just had a theory that just sounds so armchairy that like my armchair turned into like a super posh armchair. This bus scene is an allegory for Percy Jackson because it's such a huge responsibility. It's like something that's so new and foreign to him. And you have the idea of Thalia doing this, and she's supposed to be like queen of the gods almost. Like, I guess like a daughter of the king of the gods. And it's this idea of this huge responsibility of driving the sun. Thus, it's like if you have to like make a huge decision, this is like the first way to illustrate
it's the
how
same
that decision
idea
might be made. Yeah, it's like the idea of
definitely
it's
like any magical fantasy like magic realism type of book that involves like children and young adults is going to involve like some sort of allegory with like responsibility. Like, oh, great power comes great responsibility. Like Peter Parker, he's only a kid and he has like superpowers. How is he going to use those powers? Whatever. Same thing with Harry Potter. Same thing with kind of any kind of story like that. I mean, even like we always talk about 13th Year sort of as a joke, that Disney Channel movie, but it's the same, like literally like puberty itself is a metaphor for him changing into like this mermaid. You know what I mean? Like kids are constantly faced with like changing and having new, more complicated responsibilities, and that's very intimidating.
But here's a little different because it's Thalia is literally playing with fire. This is the first time she has this really like this experience of like being able to play with fire. And I think that's really interesting because you see the idea of it's Thalia taking the wheel, not Percy Jackson. Like you would think the titular character would be the one driving the car.
Well, and he expresses his jealousy too, which I think is a specific thing about Percy, where sometimes when things aren't about him, he gets a little bit like annoyed, because that, you know, even that's the entire point of Sea of Monsters, is him kind of learning to step back and realize that not every story is his story necessarily.
I mean, that's like an interesting concept to have of a character that like gets jealous. Like it can go two ways. Like if you have the annoying character, like I'm the hero archetype, I have to do everything. Like, I hate that in stories where it's just, like, sometimes having supporting characters do things, like, makes it more interesting because it actually boosts up the character.
Well, it gives them more of a chance to get, like, an interesting characterization instead of just all the time every important thing happening being the main character. Like, you obviously need to give a chance for everyone. It's also sort of an ensemble cast. Like, it's obviously named after Percy Jackson. He's the quote-unquote protagonist, but there's also Thalia, there's also Annabeth, there's Grover. Like, there's these characters that are also important, and we need to, like, see how they react in different scenarios. I think Thalia is obviously going to be very important moving forward in the story, so this is, like, a very, like, representative scene, I think, of how she acts under pressure, how she like conceptualizes of herself when it comes to responsibility, what it's like to like have this interesting perception of yourself when like you're not as old as you should be, but you're older than you were when you got turned into this tree. Like there's this weird like maturity thing too that she's grappling with.
And when it comes to like the concept of like you have like a hero character and you have the supporting characters, like it's almost like it's good to have the idea of like the step up for the supporting characters, because there's a lot of books that I've read where if you take out the main hero, everyone else is boring and bland. Like if you take out like, so examples of like where you actually really enjoy the characters, like let's look at The Empire Strikes Back. That's a good example. The entire movie is a story and a B story. The A story is Luke going on his adventure and like becoming a Jedi, whereas the B story is Han Solo, Princess Leia, Chewbacca, C-3PO, and R2-D2. The more interesting of the stories I actually find is the Han Solo story, because you actually get to explore these characters more than their depths, rather than we understand Luke. In the last movie, you understood him like really, really well. Here you understand like, oh, Han Solo and Princess Leia are going to have a relationship. They're going to do all these things. And then you even see like C-3PO like grow in that situation, whereas then they connect in the end and they become friends again, and it's great. In other stories, like I don't know, I can't even think of like a really good example of like where you take out like a really boring, bland character, and then you have a bunch of people that are just like the supporting characters, and they're just really, really annoying. Maybe Wheel of Time. Yeah,
like I think that there are obviously conflicts between the main character and the supporting characters, like because there's the inherent thing between like Talia's Zeus's daughter, so then there's like that built-in animosity that she might have towards Percy, or like that's what he was worried about when he first meets her. So it's not like they all perfectly get along or anything like that, but it's more complicated. Like she isn't just like an antagonist or like his friend. It's more of like this weird middle ground. And I'm glad we're like exploring more of like who she is as a person, because she was mentioned a lot in the last book, and she was just this mythic, for lack of a better word, figure that we didn't actually know that much about as far as personality-wise. So, like, the scenes like this help to flesh her out as something more than just like, oh, she got turned into this tree and like protected the camp for a while.
That's like the idea of when you have an idea of like a monomythic, like martyr almost, and just having like the superhero. Like, let's use Superman as example. Like, when Superman dies in Death of Superman, like everyone starts, like all the superheroes kind of like have to lift themselves up, and they have to become even better people, because it's like, what would Superman think? Same as with in Percy Jackson's, like, what would Thalia think? And then you actually meet Thalia, and she's just the exact opposite. Like, she doesn't give two trucks like what you guys think. Like, it's not in her memory, in her honor. She's just like, I did this thing because, you know, I did the right thing for my friends, and now I'm alive, and I am like terrified because we are hurling to the Atlantic Ocean. Pull up, pull up, pull up.
You're exactly right. Like, they're trying to show that she's like not this infallible, brave person the way that she sort of gets characterized, I think, by the people who remember her, by someone like Annabeth, because it's easy to do that with someone who's dead or gone or like an otherwise incapacitated, because you can't really check in on their complicated emotions or behaviors. You can make them this infallible figure, but that's not what Thalia actually is.
Well, the reason why it's like that is because, remember, the victors write the history. Like, when you think of, like, pirates, what is the first thing you think about, B?
I don't know, gold.
So normally when you think about pirates, you think of them as, like, bloodthirsty and, like, almost like savages. That's not entirely true at all. Like, they had, like, a democratic system. What they did was the funny thing is I've been rewatching Horrible Histories, so I've been having a fun time watching it and, like, learning some stuff. Yeah, and they had a whole episode. It's like, did you know pirates' bedtimes were 8 o'clock?
Well, that's pretty early.
Pirates actually had bedtimes. There was no gambling, and there was very little drinking on ships. They handled everything democratically, except the personification of the news of the time was, oh, they're bloodthirsty savages that have no law whatsoever. Whereas they're privateers. They used to either work in the military, or they, you know, were tradesmen, or they did all these things like, hey, we can make more money this way. We're going to have a more civilized thing on this boat rather than on land.
So basically what you're getting at is, if you do this one good deed and you are the victor against a perceived antagonist, then you get to write the story of who they are.
Yeah.
And that's like the story of Thalia.
It's a lot like Hamilton, where the core theme of that musical is, you know, what's the deal with a legacy? Like, how do you get a legacy? Like, you can either get it like becoming like a street sign, you know, Mercer Street, or you could become this huge being that just all he does is write all day, and people are going to remember him for the deeds he gets, except people are going to forget about him until they make a musical about him.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to have Thalia be alive again, because she has to like reckon with the reputation that precedes her in a way. Like, she has to live up to the idea of what she used to be. And that also has a lot to do with, like, she literally sacrificed herself and then became this tree that protected Camp Half-Blood. She was literally like the protector of all of the demigods. And then all of a sudden she's like a real person again.
So she's kind of like Jesus almost, and like she gets resurrected.
Yeah, the sacrificial thing. Or I guess Aslan, but Aslan's like Jesus, so it's sort of a continuum.
It's really hard when you talk about like martyrs and people, because, you know, they do things. It's either you can look at them one way or another. It's not like, history is never black and white. It's always, there's many layers to the colors, and that's why I like a lot of characterizations in Thalia, because she's a very gray level character. Whereas we don't know if she's evil, we don't know if she's good. Like, I just imagine, like, Rick Riordan, like, sitting down, like, with a cup of tea and, like, listening to our show and, like, listening to us, like, talk about these things. Like, oh, like, the moral quandary and, like, ambiguity between morals. And he was just like, I just wanted to write a chapter because my son tried to have a driving lesson. I thought it'd be funny.
But even in real life, that's what it represents, though, right? Like, that's what people say when you turn 16. They're like, oh, you're going to start driving soon. You're going to be real hell on wheels. Like, people always, like, make these weird comments as you reach a certain age about, oh, you're going to drive and soon you're going to be doing this and you're going to be hanging out with people and you're becoming home late. Like, this whole, like, stereotype of what a teenager is, and the different types of, like, limited agency that you have, where you have some agency more so than you when you were a child. You can drive, you can go different places, you stay out later, that kind of thing, but you're still also a kid, and like that's like a complicated space to navigate, like, developmentally, and that's that's what like YA speaks to. That's what it's all about, is like discussing those things. Like what is it like to come of age? What is it like to have new responsibilities, to still be treated as a child in some ways, but then be treated as an adult in others?
So like when I was 17, my parents like forced me to get my driver's license because they didn't want me to like kind of like not mooch off them, but it's like,
well, they didn't want to be your like
my own
chauffeur.
person, and yeah, they didn't want me to be their chauffeur. And it's like, if you don't get your license by 17 on the day, we will not drive you anywhere you need to go. You will need the bus and all that stuff. You know what? I'm actually truly thankful for that because I really enjoy driving, and it's like, oh my God, being able to drive, because with driving, you can get a job, you can do all these things that you like. Drive is a huge responsibility. After a while, it's like, oh, yeah, it's kind of boring, especially when it gets to traffic.
Right. It becomes like a rote thing because it's like what adults do to get from one place to another. They go to work, they go to grocery shopping, whatever, they do their chores. But it represents freedom for a teenager, right? You can go anywhere. It's like the sort of crazy, like senior year of high school feeling of freedom where you can do way more things than you used to. Because when you're a kid, really, your world is so small, even if you are a demigod in this case, because you still have like these very specific rules and restrictions about what you can do. You can't travel very far. You can't go to certain places. And that's what driving represents. It's like you're a certain form of agency that you didn't have before.
If you want a good movie to watch, I always recommend movies. You should watch American Graffiti by one George Lucas. It's all about driving and cruising, and it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy the movie. It's just one night about a bunch of kids just driving around Modesto, California.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it's trying to get at. It's funny though, because I think about when I started driving. I started driving a little later. I didn't drive until I was 20, I don't think. Just because like there was really no reason for me to. I just took like public transportation. But by the time I learned to drive, I was so boring and not at all about like, you know, being a thrill seeker or going out and staying out late and going wherever I wanted. It was just sort of like, I get to drive to campus and have a meeting with my advisor, and then maybe I will go to get Middle Eastern food. Like that's the extent of sort of what. It's really funny that like when you're younger, I think you see driving as a very different thing.
So B, I'm going to give you a pop quiz real quick. What is the most American thing you can do? And what I mean by that is, what is the most freedom you can do? What is quintessentially the biggest American pop culture?
Probably like a road trip. Is that what you're trying to get at? I guess there's the whole concept of like road trip and like Route 66 and going to like fast food places and all of that stuff.
You just hit the nail on the head. Route 66, the mother road, which I actually live right next to. And if you go to Santa Monica, that's the end of Route 66. But it's the idea of the journey. We already had that in Percy Jackson. We've had the road trip twice. Because in Percy Jackson, we've already had the road trip and we've had the Odyssey. So what is this one going to be?
Oh God, I don't know enough about mythology.
Well, Thalia did torch New England, but luckily they're able to get to Long Island real quick because it's a really short journey. The problem, though, is Thalia has a really hard time parallel parking, something that I've never, ever, ever been able to master.
Wait, did you have to learn how to parallel park to pass your driving test?
Yes, you have to.
Yeah, I had to too. Some states don't, which is crazy. I found out like in Missouri, they don't make you learn how to parallel park, which like, I guess that makes sense because there are less cities and things, but...
Well, you know the reason for that, right, B?
Because their road systems and infrastructure are different, probably.
Most of them still like drive like horse and buggy.
Yep.
So like they don't have enough room to like clear for the horse and the buggy, so they can't parallel park.
Yeah, parallel parking a horse is a real pain in the butt.
Just like I always like imagine like an old timey like I know you didn't have to have like a horse driver's license, but like just imagine that for a second, like getting like a permit for like a horse.
Yeah. Yeah. She also like splashes into the water, and then a bunch of naiads pop out because they're really annoyed, and then Apollo says, "You were right, my dear. You had everything under control. Let's go see if we boiled anyone important, shall we?" And that's how the chapter ends.
Again, I love when you have characters that are like so sarcastic. Like Apollo is perfect. Like he's not cynical. And we have this, so we kind of have like an R.L. Stein like cliffhanger. Like, oh, did she accidentally boil something alive?
Probably not. But yeah, it's just sort of goofy.
No, I'm just imagining like the whole like lake's on fire. The good old school bus is at like an odd angle as like they swim to shore. Percy is fine because he's, dry as a bone.
Well, yeah, because he's like hydrophobic.
But so the chapter ends, and now we have more questions. And what do you think is going to happen next time, B? What is the name of the next chapter?
The name of the next chapter is I Place an Underwater Phone Call. That could mean a lot of things. Does he call his dad? Maybe? I don't know.
He calls collect, or he could
underwater phone call. I guess that's where Tyson is, right? Because he's with... I forgot about that he went to go be with Poseidon in his underwater castle place. Is Tyson going to come back, maybe? Or is he going to get... Well, I doubt that it's going to be Poseidon directly, because he really isn't allowed to get that involved in Percy's dealings. So I don't know, I suspect Tyson might show up in the next chapter. But other than that, I don't have much of a prediction, other than, I guess, the hunters adjusting to the life of Camp Half-Blood, and Thalia being annoyed about it because she has this whole thing against Zoe and the hunters in general, and she has, like a very weird protectiveness about Camp Half-Blood. I mean, she literally was the tree that protected Camp Half-Blood for a while, so, that she literally represents that. Other than that, I can't really guess exactly what's going to happen in that chapter, other than Chiron's going to show up and be like, oh, he brought all the hunters who burned down stuff last time they were here. That's going to be awkward. Anyway, and then they're all just going to be grossed out by all, the dudes probably around. That's the extent of my guess of what's going to happen next chapter.
They're just men.
Yeah.
They're probably going to get, along swimmingly with Clarice, who is now, queen of the mountain.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think Clarice is going to be like, all right, sign me up. Where do I sign?
But that would mean that she'd have to, abandon her father.
Yeah, so I don't know about that, because she would have to, devote herself to a different god. But I don't know. She has some complicated history with her dad, so...
It'd be, real awkward during Thanksgiving time.
Yeah, you're come home and be like, yeah, so I'm a hunter now. I gotta go. Do you like my matching outfit? It's not a cult, I swear.
We give Artemis a lot of crap, but there's some benefits, I guess.
No, I understand. I understand why some people would join. It's still a little... There's some spooky aspects.
We're perfectly fine with just being demigods if we wanted to be demigods, but please, everyone just needs to keep staying mortal.
That's the thing, is I wouldn't choose Camp Half-Blood or being a hunter of Artemis. I would want to go home.
So we did get a plethora of emails this week. The first one's from Pearl. Incoming Iris message. Happy New Year's. Hi, Zack and B. So I haven't checked in since you sent me an Iris message to the show because, Zack, I work in theater and the fall season hit us hard and I got swamped by work. I also like to have a backlog of episodes to listen to during the workday, so I never actually got the episodes that had your reply until this week when I was binge listening to Sea of Monsters. I can't talk too much about what I have planned because of my players. Oh yeah, so Pearl's the one that did the D&D campaign.
Oh, right, yes, I heard about that.
I can't talk much about I have planned because one of my players is starting to listen to your show. She's enjoying it very much, and we have plans to see the Lightning Thief musical on tour later this month, and we are absolutely dressing up as Camp Half-Blood t-shirts and casually cosplaying. She'll be a certain red-haired artist with painted stained jeans, and I'll be a certain tyrannical daughter of Aphrodite with a proficiency in persuasion. B, you haven't met these characters yet, but Zack should know what I'm talking about. Yes, I know who you're talking about. I love it.
Yeah, I don't know who these people are, but we'll find out.
In response to your reply on the show, what kind of NPCs would you like to be? Camp counselors are an obvious option, but I feel like we could do better than that. Any options for your civilian roles would be interesting with 5 12-year-olds. I love to somehow write a Pfeffernuss and Rosie in somehow as magical creatures, maybe an automaton headshot guide or a tiny little hellhound disguised as a mortal pet. I've got a couple ideas in mind for future one-shots, and I can't divulge too much information because, again, I've converted one of my players to your amazing show. So that's a little bit, that's about half of it. So B, what type of NPC would you want to be in their campaign?
The thing is, I wouldn't want to be in the Percy Jackson universe at all. So I would probably be some mortal bystander and be very freaked out about the whole thing. But other than that, I guess, I don't know. I can't really think of a mythological thing that I would be other than maybe a begrudging half-blood. I'm so boring. I literally wouldn't want to be a part of any sort of magical anything because I'm just so deeply anxious. It would not work out for me.
So I actually have an idea, B, and this is so in-universe. Why don't you make us NPCs of your favorite Camp Half-Blood radio station in camp?
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think that would be the extent of what I would do. I'd be good morning, campers. I'm going to update you about all the stuff going on, but I will not be a part of it. Thank you.
We're demigod podcasters, and that's how we are. Except I really want to get like a little like Pfeffernuss and like Rosie like as like hellhounds and like automatons would be awesome.
Yeah, that would be pretty great.
Okay, so to continue with this, there were a bunch of good moments that happened in the session I DM'd the last time I emailed you guys in October that I wanted to share with you. Only 2 members of my party have ever read the PGO books. The other 3 are going in blind. As this is the case, they are all playing the roles of unclaimed, ignorant 12-year-old demigods, unaware of their powers and unaware of the common dangers in ruling and dealing with monsters, such as cell phones. With the exception of one mortal Huntess of Artemis, who has only been sworn in for about a week.
Wow, that sounds really fun.
The Huntess of Artemis is your typical standoffish lone wolf type, and was the one I was worried was going to run away from the rest of the party with the 5 given chances. She failed 3 separate strength checks within the first hour of the game against the grip of a daughter of Aphrodite, whose stats were all in charisma instead of strength.
That's pretty funny.
Oh, I love this.
I love characters like that are just all charisma. Like, oh, like you try to figure out their intentions and they're just like bamboozling you left and right.
Another player is a child of Apollo who essentially is Typhoid Mary and affects everyone around them with the common cold if they fail their constitution check. After my players discovered this, the 4 girls insisted on chanting a cootie shot against the middle school boy, and I gave them advantages for their constitution check. Oh, it's so good. I'm laughing.
This is a very fun campaign. You're doing a very good job. I could not be this original.
B, that seems like something we should have in the Radio Camp Half-Blood Studios, cootie shots.
Yep, just in case. Just warn against them cooties.
We have another child of Apollo who is playing the mother friend of her cousin, a child of Hypnos who has narcolepsy. The mother friend triggered a Cytyphican or Cytyphalin bird attack, demon pigeons, against using her cell phone 3 times. None of these children have an actual weapon except for the Huntress of Artemis, because they are all 12-year-olds in the middle of a field trip in Central Park, New York City. They managed to survive the non-stop screaming, Aphrodite throwing food from their lunch bags, Hypnos a very effective piccolo performance, Typhoid Mary Apollo also just shooting the dumb birds with a bow and arrow Artemis. When the daughter of Aphrodite successfully charmed her way into taking a boat across Central Park Lake with our whole party, she rolled a natural 1 in trying to persuade the boatman to let her have turn paddling and fell into the water. We're hoping to finish the one-shot sometime soon whenever, because we only made it halfway through everything I had planned after 5 hours of gameplay. It has become difficult to arrange a time for 6 working adults to line up with their schedules in order to play some D&D. I'll check in again when we do and hopefully share some good moments from the game. This is already a long email, and I'm about to make it longer by saying thank you so much for what you said to me on Twitter, Zach. You are such a wonderful, kind human being, and I hope that you and Rosie have a wonderful year with lots of highs and lows. No lows. Happy New Year to you and B both. Also, Pfeffernuss and Rosie, here's another year to a wonderful book reading. Best wishes, Pearl.
Aw, what a sweet email, and very impressive. Like, wow, that's so much writing and world building and character building that I'm kind of blown away by. So we got an email from Sophie who says, "Hey Zack and B, I've been listening to your podcast for a while and you two have inspired me to reread the series, probably for the 20th time or so. I love you two bantering and getting off topic and forgetting what you were talking about. I just started reading the Percy Jackson books when I was 8 years old and now I'm 12. I used to read the PGO books and some others, Harry Potter, The Mysterious Benedict Society, Series of Unfortunate Events, etc., because I had terrible nightmares. Now I just listen to this as I fall asleep. Not that you're boring or anything, and I always end up dreaming about Camp Half-Blood, or at least not waking up every hour and being scared to go back to sleep. Sorry, I got so sentimental. Anyways, keep up the good work and keep staying mortal. Love, Sophie. P.S. Please do Heroes of Olympus. We're probably going to do Heroes of Olympus, I imagine. Thank you for your lovely email."
Oh yeah, no, we're gonna do it. Don't worry, that's like in our itinerary. But that's such a nice message, Sophie. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I definitely do the same thing with podcasts. If I'm having trouble sleeping, it's not to say that the podcasts are boring. It's just sort of comforting to have voices of funny people around, and we are hilarious. I know.
Like when it comes to me, like I'll listen to like YouTube shows. Like I'll put on like Red Letter Media and like listen to like these people just talk about movies all night, and I'll just go to sleep to it. And then my dad's like, what were you watching last night? You have to keep that down. Just a bunch of like people laughing. Thank you so much, Sophie. That was a lot of fun to read, and I really appreciate it, especially like the idea that you listen to us to help you go to sleep. There's a lot of podcasts that I listen to that help me put me to sleep, and that's not because it's boring, but because it's so familiar that you can like not really pay attention to it and let our, I guess, voices like drift you off to dreamland. Is this where like Careless Whisper starts playing?
Yeah.
So we did get one more email, and I want to say the person's name is Leanne. If it's wrong, please correct me, and I apologize. Hello, Zack and B. I am Leanne from Holland, and I am a 13-year-old. I love your podcast because it's so much fun. The English is something really hard, and I don't really know what a hedgehog was for, I think, 5 episodes.
All right, you show me this. You sent me this message.
In the Netherlands, you can't have a hedgehog as a pet because we have it in the garden, but you can't put it in a little hedgehog suit or something. It's a little bit hard for me to think about all the places.
Because it says hedgehog suite. Like, you can't put them in a little hedgehog suite, like a little home. I think it's what...
Oh, I thought it said suit.
No, it's like suite, as in
more...
like a hotel suite.
Oh, that's adorable.
Yeah, that's adorable.
I thought it was a suit, like kind of like, was it Mr. Prickle Pants from like Toy Story 3 with like little lederhosen?
Yeah, like a little lederhosen. No, I'm pretty sure that they meant suite, but that's pretty funny.
You know what, Leanne? We're going to dress the hedgehog in like a little like business suit, and then we're going to put them in a suite.
Favrenews would be so mad if I put him in any outfit. I put him in a hat and he gets annoyed, so I would not do that.
Well, he's like Mr. Prickle Pants. We'll put him in like little lederhosen because he's already a German boy.
He's a little German hedgehog. Yeah, there's 2 kinds of hedgehogs, in case you didn't know. So where does she live? Holland? You probably have a European hedgehog in your garden, which is larger, and they kind of wander around. They make little nests and all of that, and they're like, outdoor animals. And then there's African hedgehogs, African pygmy hedgehogs, and they're little, and they're originally from Africa, but they've since sort of been bred to be very domesticated, so they wouldn't survive if you dropped them off in the middle of the desert. But yeah, they're littler, and you can keep them as pets. In some states, not all states. If I were to be in California, they're not allowed.
You know what that just made me think of, B? Is like, because, they live in gardens and they make nests, is that because Leanne's from Holland, like they make a windmill-shaped like nest.
A little windmill.
That they get into.
Oh, that would be so cute. With their little lederhosen.
Yeah, the little lederhosen.
Oh, there's such a whimsical image coming to...
I know all you people in like Holland, like I know everything is not just windmills, but for us, that's just the aesthetic that's kind of adorable.
Windmills and tulips.
I don't agree with Zach with The Crimes of Grindelwald because I thought it was a very nice movie to look at and the special effects were great. My response to this is, yes, the special effects were fantastic and I really enjoyed that part of the movie. The problem, though, is the second they start talking, the whole movie unravels for me. Like, to say, like, the movie isn't a spectacle would be me calling the movie ignorant. And the movie has a fantastic job with the special effects. Like, the whole part where they have, like, the beginning scene is, like, the big prison breakout with, like, the Thestrials. Like, that part was so cool. Like, they're flying around, like, England. Oh, my God, it was so much fun. Like, there's parts of the movie that I liked, but the plot is what I hated. Like, the ending part, like, was really cool looking. Like, there were a lot of elements in the movie that I did enjoy. To say that the movie was terrible, the only reason why I didn't like it was because of the plot. And for me, I'm a more plot-driven person than I am spectacle. And you know what? I respect your opinion that you disagree with me.
Maybe it's lost in translation. Like, maybe in Holland it's a better movie.
Oh, maybe that's true. That's possible.
That's an entire theory. Like, maybe if it's not in English, it's just like the voice actor that dubbed in Johnny Depp's lines was better.
I respect your opinion, and I agree with you that, you know what? I will give you credit. I really did enjoy the special effects on that movie. Your podcast is great. Every Monday I check the podcast app, and I always forget the 5-hour difference in Holland. It is nice to hear you two just talking about books. I have just discovered it a year ago, and I really love them. I hope you are going to do this forever so that when I'm 80 and I sit in a rocking chair, I still listen to you two talk despite that you are very old. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, we'd be so old. If you're 80, well, how old is Leanne?
Well, we'd be in our hundreds.
Yeah, because we're 25. Well, I'm 25. You're younger than I am. I would be very old. We would be very old.
Okay, you talk about like a wizard with a gun. That would be me. I'd have like a wizard beard.
We would be centenarians, yeah. I would, for some reason, have a wizard beard. There'd be a lot of questions. I hope we're still podcasting in some respect when I'm old, but I don't know if we're still doing this show. Maybe a different show.
By the time like we're like really, really decrepitly old, we'd have enough of us talking that we could like synthesize new episodes, so we wouldn't have to talk.
Yes, exactly. I think we've definitely talked about this before. Like, have like a Microsoft Sam just be like, "Hello, I am B."
Sorry for my bad English, and I am going to say keep staying mortal in Dutch. Okay, B?
Yeah.
You're going to have to help me with this, and we're going to say this together, so we are both not accountable if we get this wrong, okay? And to everyone in the Dutch-speaking audience in all of Holland, we're going to apologize. And if you want to like hold us accountable for like war crimes against humanity for butchering your beautiful language, you know what? I'm fine with that. I want to say it's Blijf stervik?
It's Blijf sterfelijk, I think.
So now we're going to go hide in our little adorable windmills in Holland as the entire like Holland Empire ascends onto us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. From sheer offense at our pronunciation.
Yes. Well, I think that kind of like wraps up the show.
I think it does.
Where can they find you, B?
You can find me on Twitter at bkellygorman, and you can find me on Tumblr at twinpoetry.tumblr.com, and you can also find me on Instagram, also at bkellygorman.
If you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter at Suda41, that's SUDA41. If you want to follow our show on Twitter, that's at halfblood_radio. If you want to email our show and send us any more Iris messages, you can email us at radiocamphalfblood@gmail.com. If you want to get any of our wonderful shirts, which I think are on sale again, you can go to tpublic/radiocamphalfblood, or you could donate to our Patreon, patreon.com/radiocamphalfblood. Soon we'll be posting an episode for Ready Player One, a book by one Ernest Cline. Well, I'm Zach.
I'm B.
And keep staying mortal. Bye.
Bye, everyone.